Former director of IMF's Institute for Capacity Development and member of the Presidential Advisory Group on Debt Restructuring, Dr. Shamini Kure points out that it is a must for Sri Lanka to achieve an economic growth of 5 to 6% in order to sustain the current economic progress. Delivering the 73rd anniversary oration of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka today, Dr. Kure observed that Sri Lanka would still remain at high debt risk category even after successfully completing debt restructuring. Current projections indicate that Sri Lanka's current debt to GDP ratio will only reduce to 95% of GDP from a staggering 130% at present. She also said that the current reforms should not slow down repeating past actions of the country, as another debt restructuring process will be more painful for the nation.
The 73rd anniversary oration of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka was held at the Central Bank premises today under the theme "The Way Forward, Price Stability and Poverty Need Good Governance."
Significant progress has been achieved, but we are in a low-level equilibrium with output well below potential. This crisis is not yet over. The only way out is to grow at a rate of about 5 or 6% a year in a sustainable, inclusive way. Without such growth, we cannot escape our high debt burden even after a successful restructuring. And because the debt burden lies with the public sector will need to contract, not just this year, but also in the decade ahead. Growth will need to come from the private sector and be export-oriented given our foreign exchange needs. There is simply no other option. Much remains to be done to get the economy on such a dynamic growth trajectory. Nor should we take for granted that having achieved low inflation, that inflation will always stay within the CBSL's target of 5%, or that progress in the fiscal area will continue. Our post-independence economic history is full of stop-and-go policy and brief victories over instability that are not sustained. Well, this time really is different for 3 reasons. In all our previous bouts of macroeconomic instability, our public debt ratios have stayed below 80% of GDP. Tax revenues have never been as low as they were in 2021, and we had never defaulted on our debt. According to the IMF's debt sustainability analysis, even if we successfully restructure our debt and adhere to the tight policies that generate primary fiscal surpluses of 2.3% of GDP from 2025 until at least 2032, our public debt will decline to only about 95% of GDP by 2032, from about 130% of GDP now. In 2022, government debt to GDP averaged 65%. And looking at our neighbors, 55% in India, 40% in Indonesia, and 54% in Thailand. We will be at a high risk of debt distress even after a successful debt restructuring. If we become complacent and go slow on reforms, we can easily be back in a crisis where we are unable to pay our debts. Except next time, the adjustment will be far more painful, because we would have already restructured our domestic and external debt. The second reason this time is different is that many people are now in poverty or very close to poverty and have little or no cushion left. The World Bank estimates that the poverty rate doubled to 25% of the population in 2022, while the UNDP estimates that over half the population remains multidimensionally vulnerable. The World Food Programme finds that almost a third of children under 5 are malnourished, with 20% suffering from wasting. 2/3 of the population are borrowing or dipping into their savings to feed their families. Many people are foregoing the basic needs such as healthcare, and progress in education has been severely hampered by both the pandemic and the economic crisis. The impact on people of another debt default, crisis, and adjustment would be disastrous. And third, Sri Lanka is suffering from a damaging outflow of skilled professionals who are the backbone of economic recovery and growth. These professionals are leaving not merely because taxes. They have lost hope that the poor governance and pervasive corruption that Sri Lanka has been mired in for decades will be effectively addressed. They don't see a future in a country where the state interferes with practically every aspect of economic life, and politicians and public officials who engage in gross corruption are never punished. Another crisis will turn this outflow into an exodus.